All right, welcome to the Amazing Autists podcast number 4. Just to clarify for any new listeners that the structure of this podcast is basically we're committed to intellectual honesty. We're trying to be as intellectually honest as possible, and so we are willing to cover any subject, any topic. We will respond to every single comment that is left on this video, and we're committed to responding honestly. And yeah, we genuinely want genuine, honest, intellectual dialogue. We're sick of these other podcasts and these fake ass bitches who are afraid of getting into controversial topics and who pose as if they're intellectuals, but they're not really, because they're not really willing to go to dark places, and they're kind of pussy. And so we want to just clarify, this is the podcast. We're genuinely committed to intellectual honesty because we may or may not have autism. So we are committed to the truth, and we don't give a hoot about all these things other people are afraid of. So please, we encourage everyone to comment, and we'll even have fucking random guests on. If you want to be a guest, we'll probably let you on because we're trying to grow. If you want to, like, we could, if you have a channel you're trying to grow and you want to get some exposure, just ask us to be on the podcast. And we're just starting out too, so we'll probably accept it. We'll probably be down to have intellectual dialogue with you, and then your channel can be advertised on this, and maybe you post it on your channel, you advertise ours. We're down for that type of thing. But yeah, so no one commented on our last video, so we got no comments to respond to today. So we're not going to be doing that on this podcast. But again, any comments left on this video, we will respond to in the next podcast. So yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to take a similar approach to what Joe Rogan has done in the past. And his podcast is obviously super successful, and we're trying to do something similar to that, where we're just open-minded and asking questions and
to clarify,
trying to be honest.
When we say Joe Rogan, like the reason Joe Rogan I think was popular is because he was genuinely willing to be real about things in the past, and he would actually call people out when they were bullshitting. And he's kind of stopped doing that. Like he's not like that anymore. But ultimately, I mean, I think the reason he was popular is because he was doing that, and he was genuinely intellectually honest, and it was it was good. You could actually get real about things. But these days he doesn't do that, and fucking most other podcasts don't really do it either. And so, yeah, we believe that was what was good about podcasting in the first place when it started becoming popular. It's like Joe Rogan.
It's almost like when an entertainer starts off and they have good material, they get too big and the success gets to their head. Like, it might be a bit of that.
Yeah,
it's possible.
They lose track of
their roots, basically.
Yeah, they lose track of what got them there, and then they get attached to the level of success they've had, so they become less willing to take the same kind of risks or things like that, or they feel like they have more responsibility to be a certain way. I mean, I'm down. We don't have a fixed subject for this podcast, so I'm down to ramble about that. Let's talk about Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is a bit of he's gotten pretty soft, and he's weird. He's like a chameleon these days, where he will just fucking, I don't know. It seems like he perceives that his strength as a podcaster is that he recognizes to some degree that it's his willingness to entertain certain things, but he's interpreting that, I think, in the wrong way. He thinks because he's willing to entertain someone else's thoughts, that's what makes him good. But really, that wasn't it. It's that he was willing to entertain people's thoughts when they were valid, but he would call out the bullshit. Now he doesn't do that anymore. He becomes a chameleon and fucking just adopts the ideology and is sympathetic to anyone who comes on his fucking podcast and basically agrees with everyone, even when they contradict each other. Like, he'll have hardcore leftists on, and then he'll have more right-wing people. But it's actually even worse than that, because he won't even have the same right-wing people that he used to have on. Like, he doesn't have Gavin McInnes on anymore. He doesn't have Stefan Molyneux on. Who else is there? And then there's just plenty of popular right-wing figures that he never had on. Like, he would never have someone like Jared Taylor on. He would never have someone like Richard Spencer on. Which obviously he has no obligation to have these people on. But if he's trying to get the most popular fucking people on, he would have these people on. But he's obviously a little bit too scared, and he's not willing to go certain places. And so ultimately, his podcast is less interesting than it used to be. And so, yeah, I mean, he's slacking. He's lacking. And we're not going to fucking lack in that way. Obviously, like, it probably sounds a little cringe that we're trying to compare ourselves to Joe Rogan, because obviously we're just random fucking people trying to start a podcast. We don't want to sound too full of ourselves. But in the area that he's lacking, like, we've noticed, he's lacking. Most podcasters lack when it comes to genuinely being honest about things. They're not willing to go certain places mentally. And we're not going to be like that. We recognize other podcasts are lacking, and that's why we're making this one, because we're not fucking pussies who are going to be intellectually dishonest and be afraid to go places, because we genuinely value the truth. Maybe, is it because we're autistic? I would say no. I think we just have, I mean, some people would like to think that, and that's a subject itself. Like, yeah, maybe some people would say, oh, you're just like this because you're autistic. That's why you're willing to say fuck. That's why you're willing to be bluntly honest to the point where it's inappropriate. Maybe some people would like to believe that that's a mental disorder and call us autistic and shit. Say it's autism to, like, maybe feel better about themselves and how they're kind of pussies and they're not willing to go places mentally. And there might be, that might be a large part of what autism is often. Like a cope.
Yeah, so it's like when you're labeling people, you have to be careful that they don't start labeling you and that they don't start becoming, because it's kind of like what you're relying on is a power dynamic. You're saying, I'm going to label these people a certain way and I'm going to box them. I'm going to classify them into this box. And I feel like most people will support that. And like, it's wrong to do, because what if it's a situation where the inverse occurs and you're suddenly being put in a box? And it's like, it's not for, I don't know, it's not for valid reasons, right? Like, for sure we should classify certain people into certain categories, but
well, I mean, it depends what you mean by that.
Being blunt about being, like, honest.
I'd say psychology fundamentally lacks in a few ways. One of the ways that it lacks is that it's like predicated on it's based on the false premise that the norm is superior. Like, when you're calling someone like when you're labeling someone with a mental disorder, or I don't know what other word would they use? Would they use the term mental disorder, or they probably call it something else? But that's what they're doing. When, like, they're pinpointing people who are different, and I don't know, just the idea that they have some condition. That's why they're different from the norm, and that it must be wrong in some way. I'm sure they'd try to pussyfoot around that. They'd be like, oh no, we're not saying you're wrong. We're not saying you have a disorder. They'd probably pussyfoot around those words. But that is what's going on. Certain people who are different are being labeled as having a disorder. And I'd say psychology is largely based on the false premise that the norm is superior, or the norm is good. But the norm isn't very good. I would say the autism labeled a lot. I mean, autism itself is a bit of an umbrella term. Like, there's a wide variety of people who would fit in that group. But I'd say in many cases...
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Yeah, in many cases, though, it's like usually used to describe people who, aren't that good socially, which itself, that's a pretty complex thing, right? If someone's not good socially, like, does that mean, is it always them that has the problem? Like, maybe someone's...
yeah, like, if you're super, like, bright or something and people around you are dim-witted...
Exactly, you wouldn't be good socially.
That's an example of that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be good socially, but it's not that you that has the problem, it's them, right? Or if you're just more moral, you don't really get on the same page, like, you believe in being honest, and you want to maintain that standard of interacting with people, and the people around you aren't like that. You could frame that as like, oh, this person's autistic, he has a disorder, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not necessarily the case. If someone doesn't fit in socially, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with them. Like, because, I mean, if you treat the norm, because there are inevitably people who are going to be above the norm, right? That's the problem with treating the norm as if it's this fucking superior thing, as if it's this gold standard, which I would say...
And I swear that psychology doesn't deal with that issue very, like...
It doesn't.
As, like, adequately as it could.
Yeah.
They don't recognize the fact that that we haven't fully addressed the reality of people being outside the norm and
Yeah.
how to approach that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say largely that the reason that might be is
Is
because
because most psychologists are probably like just normal in and
it,
of themselves.
they not just
They
probably.
don't have the empathy to like understand other people fully, even though they
It's
think they
not.
do.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not that they don't have the empathy. They don't have the understanding because basically, to become a psychologist, you have to live a certain life. You have to be a certain type of person. You have to go through academia. You have to live a certain structured life in a certain way. By like, it's basically necessary that to become a psychologist, you have to be neurotypical in certain ways. Like you have to be a certain way. You can't if you had significant you live a life that basically inhibits you from actually dealing with a lot of like a variety of mental experiences. So it's a flawed field in that way, where like all none no actual psychologists really know what it's like to experience a variety of mental states. They all stayed in academia their whole lives, and I think people are underestimating that. That's really a limited amount of mental variation within the group that is people who are considered psychologists. And I think that's a fundamental problem with the field. But yeah, I don't know. How do we get on this? The autism shit? Like yeah, like
Yeah, because I think what you're saying is really accurate because it works really well when you're trying to be a doctor or like a lawyer or something, and you need to just know the technicalities, and you just need to go through the academic process to get your credentials, right? And to be part of that occupation, you know, to have that officialdom to sort of. But the idea of having officialdom and knowing people and to believe that you can do that just by, you know, reading books
yeah,
and doing things in an official way.
and when we're talking about such a subjective thing, like what is the best mental state or mental mode of being
Exactly.
to have, like it's not
Like
as
for
objective as like
yeah,
medical
for all you
science.
know, like that homeless guy who you pass by, like he might have like a better understanding of people because he's been through like more things, like really.
I mean, yeah, homeless people. I mean, that's who knows. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's possible that a homeless man, might not have any significant mental defects or anything, and they just had shitty circumstances. I don't know. I don't know how to think about homeless people. It,
Yeah,
it,
I'm just raising the point that it's like he could potentially have gone through a lot of experiences that we don't know about, and like he could really have insight. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, well, I would say that it's possible. If I were to like um, brainstorm about homeless people, I would guess that they are probably they might be like if you took the group that is homeless people and you looked at their personality traits, I would guess that they would be more likely to be disagreeable people, like harder to get along with. Like they might. That's what I would guess. Like maybe like because the way our society is, you kind of have to be somewhat agreeable to have a job and everything. You have to have a boss who's and like if you're a really disagreeable person and you're not going to take shit from anyone and you're going to call them out and be like, if they disrespect you, you're going to just say go fuck yourself. And if you're that type of person, it might be hard in this society to function. But again, those traits, if someone is that disagreeable, that probably exists within humans for some good reason. It was probably beneficial in some way evolutionarily, and that's why there are people like that. So when it comes to homeless people, I don't know. We might be eliminating certain traits, certain genetic traits from our population. Like I'm sure we are to some extent. Like I mean, that's one hypothesis for why certain populations are more violent than others. Because over time, in like northwestern Europe and shit, we had prisons and stuff, and we would eliminate the top percentiles of the most violent people. Whereas in other regions, like maybe in like Africa, they didn't do that. So that's one theory I've heard about why blacks are more criminal than other races because society does alter the gene pool to an extent, and who knows what we're doing with our current mode of being. Our current mode of being in Western civilization isn't necessarily like the gold standard or set in stone, and that's important to realize. Like there's all sorts of traits that we may be underappreciating, and the whole autism thing might be just like kind of a cope to just kind of dismiss the idea that there are a lot of people who don't necessarily fit in with this society, and it's not necessarily wrong. Like maybe our society is what's lacking. If there are all these people who have autism, like what's the number? It's quite a lot. If there are all these people who have this way of thinking, this different mental mode of being, and they all share a similar mental mode of being, then clearly we've evolved to be that way. So clearly that mental mode of being had some evolutionary merit. So we shouldn't be too quick to dismiss it or treat it as if it's like some disorder or something that's inferior, because we may be leaving ourselves lacking as a society in some way if we do that. And I would say we probably are. I would say we have a huge problem with the exact traits, with the lack of the exact traits that autistic people tend to show. Like I say, we have a huge problem with people not being honest. They're not intellectually honest. We have a fucking societal norm where things are overly based on shallow, superficial social shit. Like people care about things other than the truth more than they should. The truth should be valued more to an autistic level, to put it in those terms. Like, I would, yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I think that's what autism is a lot of the time. Autistic, but again, there's a variety of people considered autistic. But in general, when people who are upfront and honest and don't adhere to certain stupid social norms, when those people are considered autistic, I think it's largely a cope from people who are genuinely morally lacking. But they're morally lacking in a way that doesn't cause them any social problems, because they're basically teamed up with a society that's morally lacking in a similar way, and so they can just pretend that there's nothing wrong with them and that there's something wrong with honest people instead. And yeah,
I guess this is part of the reason why we're going after Joe Rogan, because it's like he's not talking about these things as openly. Like really.
Yeah, Joe Rogan.
Like he really could be like doing things a bit different. Like just what we're discussing here right now, like it arguably affects so many people, and like people just aren't talking about this enough.
Yeah, like Joe Rogan, I would say is he's exhibiting cowardice, and he knows it. He's being intellectually dishonest. He's being a coward. He's afraid to go to certain places mentally. We all know it. If you're intellectually honest, he's afraid of certain things. He's afraid to say that maybe the reason black people have more interaction with the cops is because they commit more crime. Maybe the reason they have they make less money on average, or they're less successful, or they live and they're more poor and shit. Maybe it's because of genetic differences. Maybe the races aren't the same. Maybe there's no good reason to believe that the races are the same when it comes to traits like IQ. Like Joe Rogan knows that the races aren't the same when it comes to physical traits like that are at play in the UFC. He knows all about genetic differences and how important genes are in the UFC. I've heard him talk like often about how certain people are just genetically superior athletes, right? So, I mean, if he can acknowledge that, and then I mean, we could look at the racial demographics of the UFC. Why are there no East Asians? There's like very few East Asians who are successful in the UFC, and there's probably a disproportionate amount of blacks. Maybe not. I mean, there's quite a lot of whites also, but there's a certain racial makeup of the UFC. Why are there so little Asians? Why? Like he's fully willing to acknowledge really important genetic differences when it comes to fighting. He's fully willing to acknowledge certain traits that help a lot, like like having a large head, or a large fucking jaw, or large hands, or certain traits like he talks about with transgender people and their bone density, how much that helps in physical combat. So he's willing to talk about these genetic differences and how important they are, but he seems unwilling to talk about other kinds of differences. Like if you're gonna be talking about those things, you have to be honest. You have to be consistent, right? Like Joe Rogan will fully acknowledge when someone's a good UFC fighter. Like, oh, it's like they're a genetic specimen. They're a genetic fucking. They're good at. They're suited for this genetically, right? But then when it comes to when there's a whole horde of low IQ leftists complaining about, different demographic situations when it comes to societal success. For some reason, Joe Rogan can't entertain the idea that maybe some are better genetic specimens for certain areas of society. I mean, I think he's being a pussy. I think he knows
I
damn
mean,
well
the
what's going on.
irony, I think the irony might be that autistic people are more likely to react in a rational and civil way when they do hear these kind of things, and to really analyze it, and to not take these kind of things and actually discriminate against other people based on that evidence. Like, in an ironic way, it's like the things we associate with autism might actually be indicative of just being able to process things, like in a way where you don't just viscerally react, like violently, and in a way where you're deeply hurt by the truth. Like, it's possible.
Yeah, autistic people, I would say, would probably be less likely. I mean, again, we're using the word broadly. Like, there's a variety of autistic people,
Yeah.
but yeah, we're using it in a way like people who tend to just be the type of autistic person who is like super down to be logical and is not very emotional. Yeah, they would be able to handle these subjects a lot better. Like that might be a way that the quote unquote non-autistic person is lacking. They get too emotional and they can't process reality when it comes to these areas. Maybe they're the ones who are lacking. They lack the mental fortitude to be able to fucking go to dark places. And maybe our society is going to suffer greatly because of it.
And yeah, like you said, I'm fully down if somebody like just understands this field better, and if they're willing to come on or make or drop a comment or something and tell us that, like, I'm really acquainted with this, and I disagree with your analysis here, or yeah, there are different types of autism, and what you're describing is this type or that type. Like, that would be fascinating if someone could, like,
Yeah, for sure.
come in, yeah, and like differentiate and explain to us why we're right or wrong about what we're saying, because like it's already so confusing as it is.
For sure, yeah. If anyone wants to come on and debate, we'll debate anything we're talking about. And if you can prove us wrong, we'll change our views. Like literally, we both are the same when it comes to our views are genuinely based on trying to adhere to the truth. Like we're genuinely trying to be intellectually honest. So that's another thing. Like people, based on what we've said, people are going to be like, "Oh, you guys are racist," or whatever. But like literally, to clarify, our morality is literally we're just genuinely trying to be intellectually honest. We're trying to adhere to the truth. If you can substantiate how we're wrong, we will fully change our views. Like, that's a commitment that we have to the fucking truth. So if you can substantiate that we're wrong or that we shouldn't have these views, we'll fucking acknowledge it. So if
Yeah,
anyone
just
disagrees,
telling someone. I mean, you could just imagine how many times like each of us has heard like that's racist. It's
yeah,
like it's not. It really isn't like substantiated. Like
yeah,
it
I know.
at this point, it's just meaningless, really. Like,
Yeah, people have these fucking words that they use and they think they're valid. Like instead of making an argument, people just have these like taboo words that they think are so deeply taboo and immoral that once you substantiate that this person is this, then that means they're wrong. Like racism or like xenophobic or Islamophobic or homophobic or anti-Semitic. Like these words are ridiculous. They're not substantiating that
sorry,
anything's wrong.
it's not that they're meaningless. They do have very specific meanings, but it's
They
almost like when
don't.
you keep repeating the same thing over and over, and it loses like
Well, they
its
don't.
identity.
They don't have specific meanings, though. I would say, like homophobic. I don't think that has a specific meaning. I don't think any of these words do. Racism, like most people, I'd say I don't think any race is overall superior to another. I think because we're all equally as evolved as each other, but there are differences, and certain races are superior at different things. Obviously, that's why there are racial differences in the first place because we evolved to different environments, and we became different because different traits were more beneficial in different environments. So we're different. Each race is better at certain things than others. And if I say that maybe whites are smarter than another race, they would consider me racist, even though I don't believe one race is overall superior. Most people would still consider me racist if I said whites are genetically more intelligent on average than another race. Most people would consider that racist, but so I don't know. Are we not allowed? Does the word racist? If are you a racist if you think there's any genetic difference? Because there are real genetic differences, right? So what are they saying?
Exactly.
So what does
And that's
racist
another
mean?
thing though, where
So
it's like people might acknowledge the differences, but they'll be like, "Well, you're too obsessed with this. Why are you so obsessed
well,
with this?"
to me
But
it's
it's like, but you went back to the Joe Rogan example.
well that's a
It's just
deflection if
like
they
we
say
should
that.
be obsessed and not obsessed, but we should acknowledge it because,
Well, that's a
like you said, Joe Rogan like fully acknowledges how important genetics are in fighting. So it's like, why isn't that
well
applicable to
yeah.
everything?
Well, the obsession thing that's just a deflection, right? Obviously, that's not that's them losing in an intellectual debate. But yeah, when it comes to racism, like we were saying, yeah, there are genetic differences, right? So if racism means that you acknowledge genetic differences in races, like overall patterns, like if you then that means that racism isn't a bad thing. That means racism's a good thing, if anything, because there are real differences between the races. There are different genetic strengths between the races. Like we could just look at sunburning. Black people are better at being in the sun. White people are better at being in environments with a little sunlight. Those are two definitive traits that each race has in which they're superior and inferior to each other. Those so you can't deny that there are areas in which races can be better on average or entirely, like when it comes to sun, than another. Like there are areas in which certain races are better at certain things than others. That's just a fact. And but no one really, I don't know, it doesn't seem like anyone has a problem with us admitting the sun thing. I mean, to be honest, I have had people call me racist for that because they're nuts. But yeah, like what it's not being carried out consistently. It seems like you become a racist when you talk about intelligence differences, and it pretty much seems like for some reason that's the most taboo thing. Like you're allowed to talk about physical differences. I mean, West Africans always win the 100-meter dash, so their genetic population, their race, is better at producing the elite sprinters, right? That no one really has a problem with you saying that. They might be genetically better on average. Their gene pool might be better at producing basketball players too, like shit like that. No one's really gonna call you racist for that. So you're allowed to acknowledge certain racial strengths of certain races. It just seems like you're not really allowed to acknowledge any strength of the white race. That's what it seems like, and that itself, in a weird fucking paradox, means that the norm is to see white people as inferior. I mean, if you acknowledge that, like, if you think, for example, blacks have advantages physically, and are better at certain things physically, and then you think that whites are better at nothing, there's no way that whites are better than blacks, then you think blacks are superior to whites overall. You think that there's some areas that blacks are superior and there's no areas that whites are superior. I would say that's not a non-racist position. That's you think blacks are superior to whites, and I'd say that's the norm. That's what's socially acceptable, and whether or not people, when they intellectually process things, will to themselves think that, that's one thing. But that is what people will act out because that is the norm. That is what is being acted out. And yeah, that's just an example of how the fucking word racism is just, it's thrown around all the time, but it's not very clear what people are talking about, and people are pretty hypocritical, it seems. And pretty anti-white. No one's really talking about other races who hate white people or anything. I mean, let's just be real. Like, the norm in the Western world is anti-white. They're trying to take white countries away from white people. They shit on white people all the time. I mean, that's just what's happening. So, I mean, and most people, if you start fucking caring about that, they'll try to mock you, but it's probably because they're cowards and homosexuals who are weak people who can't go to certain places mentally, and they're just kind of siding with the social norms because it's the most socially convenient thing to do. I mean, why isn't that a mental disorder? I mean, you could easily make the case that that's a mental disorder as much as you can make the case that autism is a mental disorder. Why isn't it a mental disorder when you go along with social norms that are unsubstantiated? What's that mental disorder called? It seems a lot more common. I mean, it seems
Maybe
just
we
as
can literally coin something right now to describe that.
yeah, conformist homosexual syndrome. I don't know. Seems like no, but really, like it really is ridiculous. The field of psychology. Why is there no like conformist mental disorder? It kind of tells you something. Shouldn't it be considered a mental disorder when you conform to fucking social dogma when it hasn't been substantiated and throughout history it's caused like so many atrocities? Actually, that's something itself. Like the terms, the term Asperger's, which is like a subsection of autism, is actually it's named after an actual Nazi psychologist, right? He was pathologizing people not going along with social norms, and he was an actual Nazi psychologist, Hans Asperger. That's where the term Asperger's comes from. That's where it's his mental diagnosis. And yeah, like doesn't that fucking tell you something? It's like, yeah, the Nazis, they thought that people who didn't go along with social norms are had a mental disorder, and like doesn't that tell you something? Don't most people agree that the Nazis were the ones who had a deficit mentally, like they were doing something immoral, and it was largely like them going along with the crowd. Yet we still adhere to the Nazi diagnosis of people who didn't go along with that same crowd that we consider immoral. It's ridiculous. Doesn't make any fucking sense.
So in an interesting like way though, acknowledging like racial differences amongst different groups makes you like almost an anti-Nazi. And like I don't know.
What do you mean?
I mean, if the Nazis labeled like any deviation from the norm as being like a mental disorder, and so many people have uh and so many people are not willing to acknowledge
Yeah.
things like racial differences, um it almost makes them have more in common with that Nazi like
True.
ideology.
Yeah, in that sense, because not the Nazi movement was largely like there's a large conformist element to it, I guess. So, and their society was largely about conformity. So yeah, if you're someone who acknowledges racial differences in the modern world in which it's taboo, you're someone who's unlike the Nazis in the sense that you're not a conformist. So yeah, and the people who are conforming to the anti-racist quote unquote narrative are in that way they are more like the Nazis when it comes to conformity. But then again, just yeah, then again, comparing someone to the Nazi isn't necessarily making them wrong because that's like a typical fucking thing people do. I think the Nazis would be
Yeah,
overly
but
scapegoated.
like it's ironic in the sense that like they think that they're fighting Nazis by being supposedly anti-racist. So, but in this sense, like they are more like Nazis if you took that approach.
Yeah, in the sense that they're conformist and unable to challenge fucking social norms. But
Like that's assuming that you believe uh that the anti-racist norm is that the anti-racist narrative is the norm, which we both probably would argue is the norm, right?
it clearly is. Yeah, clearly is. The anti-racist narrative is the norm. Um, like you can look at like something like Reddit, for example. If you look at Reddit, it's just super leftist. Just look at what gets shunned in society. Like it's clear. It's mostly racism and shit. I mean, there might be people who would be like, "Oh no, the norm is racism. It's not anti-racism. It's we live in a white supremacist, racist society." I mean, people could argue with us on that, and yeah, maybe we haven't fully proven that this anti-racist narrative is the norm. Like maybe we would maybe have to fucking put forth a more substantiation if someone wants to doubt that. But
But
it's
that's what makes this so great. Is that someone can do that, and we're willing to do that.
I mean that I would find that annoying if someone were to do that because
No,
like
but like, yeah, but true. But at the same time, it would be good to just have like a concrete, maybe like video or something, just like
yeah.
trying to debunk that, like officially, and just have a really good outlet for like other
True.
people who
Yeah.
might want to
True.
take that
Maybe
route.
maybe that video does need to be made. Maybe like that claim does need to be thoroughly substantiated, and then if we did that, then that could be a video that gets shared to others and be fully substantiated. Or someone else could do that. Yeah, that probably is a narrative that probably is a video that needs to be made. But then again, but people could always be like, oh, but can you prove this? Can you prove that? And I mean, and then eventually, if we're really spending all our time, we could spend all our time fucking like let's say we had more viewers and more comments, and every one of them was like, "Oh, but you haven't proven this," and like asking us to prove everything. We could end up wasting all our fucking time trying to prove every little thing that someone demands we prove. So
Yeah, just every instance of human interaction, you'd have to somehow disprove it, that it was white supremacy or whatever,
oh,
even
I
though
didn't
you
mean
really
that.
couldn't do that.
I didn't
It's not
mean
like
that.
we're not saying that white supremacy doesn't exist. It's just that,
Well, hold on. What the hell is white supremacy? I don't even like. That's another one of those buzzwords. I mean, hold on there. I mean, what is white supremacy?
well, you were talking earlier about how some people view races as inherently superior or inferior,
Right. But that
and
even that itself is more nuanced than just that. Like, if I think whites are superior, but it's like my subjective preference. Like
yeah,
I don't think that evolutionarily we're more evolved. We're all
yeah,
equally
you're
as
right. That's
evolved.
true.
But I still think whites are superior based on my own subjective preference for the traits I like most. Does that make me a white supremacist? Because I mean, if it does, I mean, I don't think that view that I said, which isn't necessarily my own view, but if it hypothetically was, I don't think that would be wrong. People
Actually,
can
that's
have
a
their own
really good point
people can have their own
because,
preferences.
yeah, for sure. Because it's like you could say that people from like sub-Saharan Africa have an easier time dealing with like extreme like sunlight, right?
Yeah,
And so you could say that they're superior in that sense.
yeah,
But to believe that that's inherently superior,
yeah.
like
That's
that
another.
that's the end all be all of like what's great.
Yeah, I mean,
Like
and
that
someone
is
could have that
obviously
preference.
subjective.
Yeah, someone could have that preference. But
Like a lot of people do it with like what is success really? Like I don't know, to a lot of people it's like monetary success. To a lot of people it's like yeah, like wealth. It
yeah,
could be intelligence. Like that's for some reason we really do value those things, like humanity as a whole, right?
yeah.
And so people like sort of intrinsically believe that those things are more valuable for some reason.
Um, well, I mean, when it comes to monetary success, it's like it comes down to like, yeah, I mean, there are people starving in the world, and it's and there are people who have high quality lives. So of course that's something people would value. Humans don't want to be starving to death. So it definitely is an important thing. I mean, it's the ability to
So
live.
it's about resource acquisition ultimately, right?
Um, I guess it's also. I mean, is life on Earth about resource acquisition? I mean, not. It's not entirely about resource acquisition. If we think about it on a very like ground level, like surviving on Earth, you need shelter, you need food. You could see those as resources to an extent. It's not just, but like food, you need to plan things out if you're going to grow food. You kind of need to plan. You need to, and then for shelter, you need to be able to build advanced shelter that's going to last. You need to be able to engineer certain tools or whatever. Like maybe you don't have to do all those things yourself, but it's not just like I mean, you could see that as resource acquisition. Like, is it resource acquisition if you fucking come across a tree and you make it into a useful tool? Is that a resource acquisition? I guess it is in a way, but it's like it's also like just a creative ability and the ability to do things, the ability to functionally produce a high quality of life. I don't know, these things might be different in different people.
It's good that what's it called that you're like just trying to clarify things because yeah, the most important thing is to be like clear with the language.
Yeah, and to be
Because
intellectual honest.
I was talking about white supremacy and like yeah, it is important to like
Yeah,
clarify what that
we
means.
have these terms and people kind of just like we just take for granted like, yeah, white supremacy is wrong. Like it's like, well, what do you mean it's wrong? What is it? Like that's kind of how people shut down arguments. It's like they don't argue in terms of truth. They argue in terms of these taboo buzzwords where it's like if the goal of the discussion isn't to substantiate that someone's out of touch with truth. The goal of the discussion is to substantiate that this person it fits the definition of this taboo buzzword. And I don't think that's logical. It's just based on emotion at the end of the day. It's not logical. It's just look, there's this social taboo. And again, why is that not considered a mental disorder? That, in my opinion, is more of a mental fault. It's a more mentally faulty way of thinking than strictly adhering to truth to the point that you don't socially interact with people well? Why is that the former considered not considered a mental disorder, but the latter is? That doesn't make sense to me. I think the people who are pushing this narrative that the former is not a mental disorder. I mean, for one, they're both pushing it based on the fact that it's more normal, but that might be because the norm is kind of dumb, and and they're also not in touch with the truth, so they will push shit that doesn't really make sense. But yeah, like what's white supremacy? I don't even know if, like, some people wouldn't even say it's believing that your race is superior. Some people wouldn't even say it's believing whites are superior. Some people would say that it's the desire for whites to rule over others or be on top. And again, like, that's a bit nuanced itself. Like, if I want whites to be on top in, like, Britain, which is a country that was historically British, if I want whites to be on top in the sense that I want that country to, I want the British people to have the ultimate say in how that country goes, whether that's, like, not necessarily through suppressing any kind of democracy, but, like, maybe in a democratic way where you have them as the majority population. I would say, yeah, I want Britain to be governed by the British people. I would say it's a homeland for the British people. I would want the British, in a way, to have power in that country. I want that country to be ruled by the Brits, not ruled in the sense that you're gonna fuck with other people to an immoral extent, but yeah, I would want the Brits, in a sense, to be on top in Britain, and the same goes for every other country that has a white identity. Why would I not want that? Like, are you a horrible, immoral person if you want Nigerians to have the say, to decide what happens in their country? Does that make you a Nigerian black supremacist? Because that's just normal. I mean, is that wrong? I don't see how that's wrong. Then the argument you'll often get if you take it to that level is that, oh, well, why though? Why? Because it's subjective. It's like, yeah, it is subjective. Everything's fucking ultimately subjective. That doesn't make it wrong, but they will try to. That's, people will often do that. If you get beyond this fucking calling things taboo words, they'll just be like, well, why? Well, why do you care about your own people? Why do you care about your race? Why do you care about your race going extinct? With the argument, when it comes to that level, basically being that, oh, ultimately your views are subjective, and as if that's a point. But, like, that's not really a strong argument. That's just pointing out that morality is subjective, which it is. So you can always point out morality being subjective. That's not a really strong moral argument. You can do that with any kind of moral claim. So, I mean, and then that's the other thing they do. But yeah, it's just the left in general. And when I say the left, I guess what I'm saying are the predominant social norms that are adhered to by more leftists than non-leftists. Most of the people who don't adhere to these social norms aren't on the left. Almost all leftists will adhere to this idea that white supremacy is evil and needs to be combated. And probably most people on the right would also. It's a very prominent social norm for some fucking reason. Probably because, people aren't quote-unquote autistic enough. I don't know. Maybe this is like some grand scheme to fucking buy psychologists, or I don't know. Maybe this is part of some grand scheme. Like, we know that there was psychology was used in a really pseudo-intellectual and shitty political way in the USSR. Maybe the same's going on now. Maybe this whole autism thing is part of, like, a genuine attempt to subvert our society and to get our society out of touch with truth, so that they can, replace, like, our solid, truth-based society to the extent that it was, with a society with the morality that they would prefer. I don't know.
And yeah, you were saying that morality is subjective, but I guess you could study behavior and actions, and you can come up with objective, like, statistics, or like ways of looking at things based on, like, the way things are based on the way things are, like the trajectory of what's going on, right?
Yeah, but ultimately, yeah. I mean, there's still objective truth, but still, ultimately, all morality at the end of the day is subjective. That doesn't mean it. That doesn't make it invalid, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that so yeah. I guess to clarify at this point that I guess I'm a nihilist in that sense, but then again, there are different forms of nihilism. That which is something that also should be clarified. It's another one of these words that's a kind of an umbrella term. There's different people who fit into that category that is nihilist. So a nihilist is someone who believes that there is no objective morality, which is true. There isn't ultimately objective morality. All morality is ultimately subjective. And but there are different types of nihilists. There are people who believe that in the sense that they recognize there's no objective morality, just like on a logical level they can see that there's no objective morality, but they still have a morality that they treat seriously despite it being subjective. I would say I'm that kind of nihilist. I'm not someone who just completely dismisses the idea of morality altogether and thinks that I shouldn't have a morality. I think those nihilists I would disagree with and I think they're hypocritical. But because um, to even like say that to even like come to the conclusion that morality is ultimately subjective. I mean, that is you demonstrating morality yourself because that's you assuming that it's right to adhere to objective truth, which is ultimately a moral belief that is ultimately subjective. It's a subjective preference that it's good to adhere to truth. But the people who are trying to point out the truth that morality is ultimately subjective are actually themselves living. They are adhering to some morality, the morality that it's good to adhere to truth. So there's different types of nihilism. I think it's naive to think that there's different. Yeah, like I mean, just because all morality is ultimately subjective doesn't mean that it's not important or that you shouldn't take it seriously. I believe that it's all ultimately subjective, but I still take it very seriously. But some people can't handle that. Some people, I don't know. Some people can't handle that and think that if you don't believe it's objective, then you can't be moral or something.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of religious people are probably under that category, right? Where they
Yeah,
just can't admit that things that like ultimately everything is subjective, and they have to hold on to the belief that no, like there's God, and he has like an objective way of measuring how moral we are, or there is a set of gods, or like ultimately everything we do is part of like some grand scheme, or
yeah,
some grand design, and all of us like have free will, and
yep.
we have choices to make. And yeah,
And then these are all different fucking schisms politically too. Like, what the hell are we? Like, we really are. If we get into it, like, we're kind of a rare like niche or whatever.
like weird hominids on a
No, no,
rock
I'm
floating around
saying,
a giant fern.
yeah, but I'm saying, yeah, in terms of life forms, yeah, but I'm saying in terms of political, where we line up politically, like we're atheists, we're fucking moral nihilists, we're race realists, we're fucking quote unquote autistic or whatever. We we're somewhat libertarian. I mean, it's a bit of like we disagree with a lot of people. Like there's schisms. There's certain schisms in all these on each political side, right? Like there's a lot of right wing religious people who we don't think like them at all, really. Um, and I don't know if we could get into that this one, maybe another podcast. But like, yeah, there's schisms on the right that I strongly disagree with, or I think that are destructive. There's like the religious people who are completely fucking who blame everything in society on straying away from religiosity, but ultimately like don't have the intellectual honesty to admit that there's no evidence for God, and they just aren't logical. They have beliefs that are unsubstantiated. Um, and then there's different people on the right who react differently when it comes to racial things, or they're where we'd be considered alt right. I think like I don't know exactly what that term means, but it tends to be people on the right who have adhere to race realism and have a racial bend to their political views. So like, there's all these different fucking schisms, and I don't know. If we're thinking strategically, I think we need to overcome them to some extent. I'm not sure how we would do it, because I would say it's probably not our types that are the ones who are the least tolerant. I don't think we're the least tolerant type of person on the right. I think it's probably more like, I don't know, genuinely a lot of the religious people, like, they genuinely adhere strongly to religion, and they're very stubborn about it. It's very core to their beliefs, and it's something that we disagree with strongly. So I don't know. The whole right wing right now, the whole alt-right, the right in general is pretty fucking divided. And that's an interesting subject in itself. I'm sure you could say the same about the left too, but if we're thinking strategically, it should, I don't know, it's pretty important to solve those divisions. I would say ultimately the most important thing is the truth. I would say adhering to the truth and having a strong truth-based morality is the most important thing. I'd say that's why we have our political beliefs, and I'd say if it should be that the basis of the right, and we should have that underlying morality more above everything. But I would say that, religious people don't do that, so maybe they're not compatible with that, and maybe, I don't know, we're more of a fringe than, maybe we're just inevitably going to be a fringe. Yeah. I don't know. But anyway, we could leave this podcast under an hour if you want. It's been like 52 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know. It seemed okay.
Yeah, I'm down, because we made... Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just from the perspective of getting like to like the roots of what we're doing, it's kind of nice to have like one of these just to decide like the basics again and like ruminate over them. And
Yeah, well, we didn't have any comments to respond to. The last few videos, they were like over an hour. I think the last one was almost 2 hours. And like, we didn't even get any fucking comments. Like, no one's really engaging with it. So, I mean, I feel like, yeah, we should probably make this one a little shorter. But yeah, we don't have a set time for these podcasts. We're just doing them whatever. I'm down to stop this one soon. And yeah, if anyone listened this far, then yeah, just fucking comment whatever. If you disagree on anything, or if you have anything on your mind, you want us to cover it, or if you want to fucking come on this podcast and discuss shit with us, just let us know. We'll respond to literally every comment. No subject is off limits. Yeah, I'm down to end it there.
All
right.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say. Just yeah, we're really hoping that things transpire in a good way, and I don't know. Hopefully, we can form some sort of community. Like it's interesting because the community could be like really hostile people towards our views, or it could just be people who are curious, or people who agree with us or disagree with. Like it could be an interesting scenario. The people who choose to comment or come on in the future, we're hoping that it does happen.
Yeah, we genuinely want intellectual dialogue, and like an intellectual community where we can openly discuss things, and who knows what fucking understandings we'll come to. But we want to improve our understanding, and like we said, if anyone can talk us out of our positions, you can substantiate how we're wrong about anything, we'll fully change our positions. Like all our morality is, like, or the most fundamental thing to our morality is adhering to the truth. That's the main goal. We believe it's important. It's like the ultimate virtue, arguably. And yeah, that's what we want to do. And yeah, we don't, like, on the internet, like, obviously there's a lot of nonsense on the internet, a lot of nonsense when it comes to podcasts and YouTube, or just fucking social media and shit in general. There's a lot of nonsense on the internet, but there still is the potential on the internet, on YouTube, to, have real intellectual fucking areas where we can genuinely have real discussions.
Yeah, like
at the highest
we
level
can discuss
possible.
anything really. That's the
Yeah,
great thing. We can discuss politics. We can discuss um
yeah.
like
Like the
genetics. We could discuss astronomy. Like if people want to discuss these things, they're welcome to come on. Like
yeah,
really,
yeah,
just
yeah. So that's what the podcast is.
archaeology, like history. There's like all kinds of things that
Yes,
possible.
so that's what we're trying to do on this podcast. We want to just like use the internet for the potential good it can be when it comes to discussing things seriously and having genuine dialogue. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So yeah, anyone who wants to comment or fucking even come on the podcast, just fucking let us know and we will fucking respond in the next video. I'm down to leave it there under an hour. Um, yeah. If you want to say anything more,
Uh, just yeah. If anyone is listening this far, thanks.
yeah. Shout out to anyone who listened this far. Farewell.